Ready, kids? Welcome to another of our Wednesday yachting luncheon. Couldn't be prettier out our windows. Holy cow. Welcome. Before we get going, I want to introduce a couple of special folks. Our speaker today brought along his wife and her daughter. So Yolanda, Keefe, and Kim, smile for us, please. And we have... Which one's the daughter? Good point. Excellent point, RC. And we have our rear Commodore, Kenny Glidewell. Kenny, stand up, buddy. Glad to have you here. A little bit about future speakers. Well, during the Big Boat Series in September, we will be graced with the beautiful imagery of the world-renowned photographer Daniel Forster. Daniel is an incredibly great yachting photographer. He'll be here on the occasion of the Big Boat Series to show us his greatest work. And then you want to come by in July to learn all about what's going on with sharks. Brendan Southwell will be here. Southwell will be here to talk all about sharks in the bay. We heard about whales and porpoises. What about sharks? He's going to tell us about that. In June, Michael Ellis, the noted naturalist, will be here to talk all about the mysteries of the Mojave, now a desert, once a lake in North America. Bob Devlin will be here to talk all about Grand Prix racing on Marina Boulevard. Who's done that? It happened back in the 30s. Then we'll have an endurance rower. Carlo Fiorici will be here to talk all about the hard way to go from Norway to Iceland with a rowboat. He did that. In May, we'll have Bill Pearson of North 3DI Technology come and talk to us about the latest, newest technology in sail making. It's quite amazing. Cool visualizations for people to get the optimal sail shape between their sails and so on. Ron Holland, the naval architect, will be here to talk about his new book, All the Oceans. And Steve Tashia, chairman of the America's Cup Selection Committee, will be here to talk about how they pick people for the Hall of Fame. John McNeil will be here to talk about the International Council of Yacht Clubs. In April, Bob McLaughlin will be here to talk about his new book, U505, A Legion of Heroes. And Jocelyn Nash next week will be here to talk about 70 years of racing on San Francisco Bay. Holy cow. She knows she won a Mallory Cup and pretty much everything else she can win inside the Bay over those 70 years. A little bit about, I think Jimmy DeWitt was on that boat, wasn't he? You had the steering stick in your hand, as I'm recalling. A little bit about our speaker today. His father was one of the original 500 bondholders. You may recall the club was initially funded by 500 people who each put up $500. You're good with math. You said that's $250,000, and that seeded the club. And he had number 222. I don't think you can still charge that number, but, you know, give it a try. It's RC after all. Then in 1939, our speaker today got on a sailboat for the first time. He was 7, and he got on a boat called the Volante, 43-foot sloop, which just happens to be on that column right there. There's a picture of it in front of the World's Fair of 1939, which was the occasion of this first sail. RC sailed in the bay constantly from that time till now. And in 1950, just as the Korean War was heating up, his father encouraged him, and he did in fact join the yacht club, so became a member in 1950, so that wherever he went in the world, he'd have this card and maybe be safe somehow because he could flash his yacht club card. After 56, he went to Korea, then he went to Key West, tough duty in the Korean War down in Key West. He came back to San Francisco after that, and in 58, little known fact, there was a race of bigger boats here, and afterwards the Chronicle, I don't think it was Jack Smalley, but the writer in the Sporting Green in those days wrote about a race of big boats that had just happened at the St. Francis Yacht Club. That idea percolated in RC's head for a few years, and in 63 he wrote a letter to the then Stan Natcher of the Commodore. Mr. Natcher's We have another Mr. Natcher here with us today. So Stan Natcher, who was then the Commodore, in 63 wrote a proposal to create the Big Boat Series, which began in 64. For 10 years, our speaker today was the chairman of the Big Boat Series. In 75, he became Commodore of our yacht club. In 79, he became the first the manager of the first 6-meter effort in the modern era. He did 7 of those. Last one was just a year or so ago. In '85, when I agreed and Tommy Blackhaller agreed to be the general manager and Tom the skipper of the Golden Gate Challenge, we kept running around talking about racing 12 meters in San Francisco Bay. Everywhere we went, I kept hearing this echo, and people would say, no, that can't happen, that can't happen. And I kept hearing, there's never been a 12 meter on San Francisco Bay, there'll never be a 12 meter in San Francisco Bay. And I kept hearing, and pretty soon I got closer to the echo, and it was coming from our speaker today. And I said, we got to change that. So Blackheart and I talked about it. I said, why don't we make this guy my senior advisor, give me good counsel on the America's Cup. So we sat in that domino room there, and I asked, would you please be my senior advisor for the Golden Gate Challenge? And he took about 10 seconds to say, absolutely. And literally, I'm not kidding, later on that day, Conroy called me and said, holy criminies, you wound up RCs running around telling everybody, we need to have 12 meters in San Francisco Bay. We're going to have 12 meters. And I'm not kidding, it was like flipping a light switch inside our yacht club. In '01, Terry Klaus proposed that our speaker today become the curator and historian for our club. We had a few yachting models in those days. Our speaker today brought 48 since from that time to this time. We now have 71 models in our yacht club. And you could say that it's the best contemporary model. We have more contemporary models than any other yacht club in the world. And, lots of people come and go in our yacht club and race sailboats, and he's done a bit of that. As you know, he was president of Barriott way back 40 years ago, and they function in committees and become Commodore, but very few of them have had the same effect that our historian and curator today have had, because our model collection has enhanced our club, as well as the great articles he constantly writes. So when we thought about who it would be that we should talk to about great sailing yachts at San Francisco Bay, I couldn't think of a better speaker than ours today. Please welcome R.C. Keefe, Staff Commodore.
This is my new friend. Well, I now have about 40 minutes to tell you, get you into detail of 90 years of the history of the St. Francis Yacht Club. And if you don't think I can do it, here's my notes. See? 2 sides. Whew. At any rate, I have about 1,500 slides that really illustrate the history of yachting on San Francisco Bay, and obviously you can't do a show and show 1,500 slides, so I pick from them certain ones that I think there is some general interest in. And today, this is a show that I did. I see it says 1975, but I've done the show in almost every yacht club on the West Coast. And I've done it in Australia and in England and in Switzerland, and carried the message about these wonderful yachts in San Francisco. And by and large, they've usually been very good, because you can tell by how many questions there are or are not. So,
remember Poland, Yolanda wants to remind you.
Oh, yes. I am also an honorary member of the Royal Polish Yachting Squadron, not in Warsaw, but in Gdansk, out on the Baltic. And I could do a slideshow on what it's like sailing on the Baltic with the Poles, but I think you're not going to get that one. We go back a ways to things that were of interest to me. Our R class on the West Coast and elsewhere in this country in the 1920s, the early 1930s, was where really good high-class yacht racing was going on within the R's. And we had a great fleet of them here in San Francisco. One of them was the RASCAL. The RASCAL was designed and built here, actually. to the R class in the international rule. And this one, the Mistral, or the RASCAL, was designed and built by Lester Stone, who spent many, many hours of his life in this room. But Lester thought that would really help the Star to get the class going, and he was quite right. Over the years, we had several R boats built here, and at one time we had about 13 almost every Sunday at a starting line. That's a lot of boats in that day and age. The Ace was designed and built in Sausalito at Herb Madden's yard in 1926. And from 1926 to about 1930 or so, she was really unbeatable. The R-class boats from Southern California would come up here and take a crack at the Ace. They were never successful. The R-class, to a certain degree, up in Puget Sound, would send a boat south. But Arthur Russo, who was one of the original members of this club, had the Ace, and he was as good a sailor as there ever was, I suppose. However, in about 1930, the R-class just dissolved. And it was a victim of the Depression in 1929, 1930. And these boats were like most good racing sailboats, very expensive boats at the time to build and to scene. So the Ace just literally killed the class. However, the Ace today belongs to our member, Robert Cadrinell. He has completely rebuilt her. She is just gorgeous, and she lives either up in Seattle at his home, in front of his home, or down in San Diego. So it's nice to see an old boat like that alive and well, and Bob has just done a marvelous job restoring the Ace. The Patricia was an R that was brought out here by Nelson Jones, the Commodore of the Corinthian Yacht Club across the bay. And he bought her in Chicago. And at the time, she was the best of the R's on the Great Lakes. So it was very interesting to see, and in this slide, you can see the Corinthian Yacht Club over on the left side, to see how this Great Lakes boat was going to function in San Francisco. And she functioned to a certain degree. On the first day, they got her sailing, which is this day, right out here off Alcatraz, she sunk. And fortunately, without any loss of life or what have you, but she was a very light weather, Great Lakes, freshwater kind of boat, and she did not like San Francisco Bay, obviously. But what did like San Francisco Bay was our fleet of bird boats. And these boats were designed and built, essentially the first ones by Herb Madden over in Sausalito. He built the first the first bird boat in 1922. And here's a little shot of the birds right out here in front. And what used to be out here was this big white nun buoy. And every year, in about March, the Coast Guard would come by and set that buoy. And it remained out there until the season was over in October and November, and the Coast Guard would come by and pick up their buoy and take it home. It was very nice of the Coast Guard to look after the racing marks for us, but particularly right here in front of the yacht club. The INVADER goes back to 1926 in the hands of Don Lee. Don Lee was one of the original members of this club. Don Lee was the founder of the Don Lee Mutual Network, who built that building, a beautiful building that's still down on Van Ness Avenue. And Don Lee was a sportsman. He was a big game hunter. He was a polo player. He was a photographer. He was a flyer. But in 1925, probably 1923, he focused on the yacht race from Los Angeles to Honolulu, a little 2,250-mile jaunt across the Pacific Ocean. and he decided that he would really like to break the record, the sailing ship record, between the West Coast and the islands. So he found the INVADER in Southern California. She had been built in 1906 by George Lawley in South Boston, and at 130 feet, she was quite a sizable piece of equipment. And anyway, he bought her and started throwing money at her. She had never been in a yacht race. She had no such thing as racing sails. She was a big cruising schooner that was built for circumnavigation. So he acquired a crew, 30 professional seamen. That's what he had on board. He had 6 in the afterguard himself, and he was no particular great sailor. But Owen Churchill, who years later became a very famous member of this yacht club, was the crew chief. Well, they had 30 paid hands and 6 in the afterguard, and they took off to Honolulu, and they damn near set the record. They could see the islands very nicely when the wind died, and the last 48 hours of the race cost him the record. However, he did win the race. He couldn't care less about winning the race. What he wanted to do was to own the record. So she came back here to San Francisco. He hung her on a mooring in Sausalito. I think there were only 7 crew members that made the trip back to San Francisco. And he sold her sometime about 1935. And for years she laid over in the Berkeley Yacht Harbor, almost before there was a Berkeley Yacht Harbor. And she just deteriorated and deteriorated. He had no particular interest. And somebody came along in Southern California and took her down to San Diego. And for many years, she was a tour boat, so to speak. You could go out on INVADER for $10 with a box lunch or something. She had no real sails or gear. And at a given period of time, again, the Coast Guard came along and wouldn't certify her. And with that, she sold to a group of Europeans. She disappeared, went around Point Loma and headed towards the canal, and she turned up in the south of France, and she just disappeared. Nobody heard, nobody knew, nobody cared, I suppose, with her European ownership. But a few years ago, she came out, and we see I see the pictures you see of these beautiful yachts, older yachts racing in the south of France and Italy. And sure enough, here come the INVADER. And the INVADER is absolutely gorgeous. It is like the class of the class. It is shined and polished. She has an Italian registry, a flying Italian flag. She is totally in the hands of professionals, and she moves around from harbor to harbor. She has no real home port. And a year or so ago, the Commodore over here ran across her and sent me a very, very nice picture of INVADER. Well, as far as I know today, she's still over there and it's still doing the same thing. So, again, it's very nice to see where these older boats wind up, because most of them wind up, they just go away. And this is another one that one more click, Bob. Morningstar, a 98-foot schooner that was designed and built in Italy in 1927, fell into the hands here to our member Richard Ream. Again, the bug of the Honolulu race, the record, was in Dick Ream's mind. So when the war was over, he acquired her at auction. The Navy had her during the war. When the war was over, actually the Department of the Interior auctioned her on the federal courthouse steps here in San Francisco, and Dick Ream stepped in and he bought the the Morning Star for $5,800, and there was no second bidder. He then delivered her to Lester Stone in the Stone Boat Yard in Alameda, Oakland at the time, and he just sort of said, let's put this thing into first-class condition, and I want to be ready to go in the 47 Honolulu Race. And so Stone, who was quite capable of doing this sort of thing, did indeed go to work on the Morning Star, and they took her in the 47 Honolulu Race and didn't do very well. It was still, she was still a big schooner, not really ready to race. So the 47 was a trial, so to speak. He came back again in 49, and by now she had a lot of new sails, she had a lot of new gear, she had a crew on board that really knew her. She stayed the whole time, for the most part, in Southern California. Because Dick would say, we get up to the bridge, set a spinnaker, run down the bay, and by the time, in 10 minutes we run out of bay. Yeah, schooners like this don't like racing around San Francisco Bay. There's just not enough room. Room meaning between the top and the bottom. The bottom gets very close to the top in a lot of places. So he kept the boat down there for the most part. But she was ready to go for the 47 race, and this picture of Morning Star is taken at dawn, probably about 6 a.m., on the 4th of July, 1949. And the race was to start at noontime up in L.A. She's sitting on the car at the Wilmington Boat Works down towards Newport Beach, really. And here they are. They've got to get up to the starting line by noontime. And Dick Ream was very proud of his schooner. And he decided early in the morning that the first thing they had her up on the car. They tore all the bottom paint off her. She had no bottom paint on her whatsoever. Took the propeller off her. She was going to go on the race without using the engine, obviously. But Dick Ream wanted the rig polished. So they got 5 guys in bosun's chair, put them in the air, and polished the rig. That's what the boss wanted. They launched her. A towboat picked her up, towed her about 20 miles up to San Pedro for the start of the race. And obviously they did. And this is Morning Star, probably about 4 in the afternoon on the 4th of July. She was the first boat up around the west end of Catalina, and this is the west end. And you get an idea of what her sail plan looked like here. And then, I'm going to emphasize something here. That's the west end, or was the west end of Catalina. And the next slide is about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. And she had gotten herself down to Honolulu so that they blew every sail out they had except the storm spinnaker and the mainsail. And they didn't know at the time, but he did indeed in 1947 break the Honolulu Race record. He now owned the record. And you can see that night in Molokai, there was a lot of wind. You can see where she'd been dragging the end of her main boom in the waves as they came by. They were scared to death that the pressure on the outboard pressure on the end of that main boom was going to pull the boom right off the mast. And if that was the case, there was going to be some big problems. You can see the rust running down the side of her. And anyway, Dick Ream had reset the record. But that wasn't good enough for Dick Ream. He said, well, we do it once, we do it again. But he says, I know this. This is right here in this room. I remember him saying something like this. He said, there is no more speed to get out of Morningstar. There is nothing left. We've got all of her that we could possibly get. So what he did is he got Bill Lapworth and a couple of other naval architects, and he said, look, I can't buy a boat. I can't find a boat in the world that will beat Morningstar the way she is. We got it, and I don't have time to build a new one. So what can we do to Morningstar to get some more speed out of that hull? And they came up with this idea of converting her from a schooner to a ketch, which really meant you take all the horsepower in the mainsail and rear end of the boat, make a kench out of her, and move all the horsepower to the front end and put some big spinnakers on her. So there's a line drawing here from the Watt Sailmaking Company in Torrance, who made all the new sails for her. So this was for the 51 race, but she just wasn't ready in 51. So in 53, he went again. And again, he came close to the record, but what he knew with Morningstar and a new rig is there was still something left to get. And finally, what you see here is the new ketch rig. She's got a Dacron mizzen and new Dacron headsails, but he wouldn't let go. He had a beautiful Egyptian duck mainsail, a cotton mainsail, and he insisted on when they made the conversion that the mainsail on the new boat be of a size to fit that beautiful mainsail he had. Well, he got it that way. But this is Morningstar sailing the first time under her new ketch rig. And this is Morningstar passing Diamond Head. This is now the 55 race, finishing the 55 race. He was first boat to finish. He did not win on corrected time, but he broke his own record. And you can just see, pretty good looking boat. This time she wasn't all scarred up, but
That's the one that's on the screen. On the left,
yeah. So at the trophy presentation that evening, he accepted the trophy, and Dick got up and made a very nice talk, and he said, gentlemen, she's for sale. I've gone as far as I'm going to go. And he brought her home, hung her on her mooring over in Sausalito, and a couple of years later, Louis Benoit, a member of this club and one of the really early wine barons up in Napa County, bought her, and he used her just a little bit, hoping, I think, to sell wine with, but eventually he sold her. She made her way into Southern California and was owned down there for many years. And in about 1963 or 4, they decided to take her to Europe. And in the process of coming out of the Panama Canal, put her on a big reef. And that was the end of Morningstar. So to go on again to some of the bigger boats, this is Windward. Windward's an 83-foot sloop that was built in 1927 for Janice Morgan, who was the Commodore of the New York Yacht Club. And he owned her until Cyril Tobin, who was a member of this club and the Commodore here in 1934, bought her in 1941. However, the war broke out. The war was already was in Europe by 1941. And what he found was he couldn't find a ship to get her on, to get her out to San Francisco. The German submarines were very active on the eastern seaboard and down in the Gulf and towards the canal. And there were, every once in a while you find a ship that had room. It's not so much like he was causing these things to happen. But Lester Stone found that they couldn't find an insurance underwriter. Nobody would insure the boat on the deck of a ship with maybe the German submarines around. So he didn't get her here until 19 45 at the end of the war. And this is Windward. She's an 83-foot varnish. She was all varnish. She had no bottom paint. She was varnished from the top of her mast to her keel. The whole inside of her was gorgeous accommodations, all varnish. There was no paint on this boat anywhere. And Tobin kept her that way. So this is Windward going past the Brothers Lighthouse in the 1946 Honolulu Race. And in 1951, he arranged a match race with another M boat owned in Southern California. And these two owners agreed that they would have two matches. They would race once in San Francisco and once in Santa Barbara, which is where PATRICIA, the other M boat, came from. So they did have the first race here, which PATRICIA won, and the second race, to be in Santa Barbara, did occur a year later, but there was no wind in Santa Barbara. So let's see if we can come back on that one. One of the, it's a little hard to see something I wanted to show you, but on her bow, Cyril Tobin had a figurehead, and the figurehead was a statue of St. Francis, which he had acquired in Rome when he was on a tour over there. And he found this statuette, and in an audience with the Pope, he had the Pope bless the little statue. So the statue, the figurehead, was installed on Windward, and there until he sold her. Yep. Okay. Okay. Well, you got to go forward to get backwards, I guess. No. Well. Yeah. Oh, I've got the back arrow here. Yeah. There you go. Oh, okay. Well, I wanted to point out to you that the little statuette, when Tobin sold the Windward, Lester Stone took the statue off her, and he kept it until Commodore Tobin died, about 10 years ago. And he put it on this plaque along with the name of other boats that Tobin owned. And we have had this ever since. He also brought a pretty good-sized statuette of St. Francis, and that was in the old building, but was consumed in the fire. Windward was taken in the Acapulco race in 1958 from San Diego to Acapulco, and she didn't win the race, but set a new record, was first boat to finish. And coming home from Acapulco to San Diego, a pickup crew, a couple of professionals, but not very many people aboard, went into Yelapa, and they went ashore to get off the water and have something to eat and go to the local Safeway, I suppose. But while they were ashore, she either broke her anchor chain or she dragged it to a point where she got inside the breaker line, and within an hour she broke up, and that was the end of Windward. But she was, for about 10 years, she was just a marvelous boat to see. To see her sailing, people would say, gee, look at that big sailboat. God, who would own something like that? And Cyril Tobin, he'd smile, and he wouldn't say this, but he happened to own the Hibernia Bank. He could afford the boat. He had very little trouble with that subject. Dragoon, a 66-foot ketch that was designed and built for Robert N. Bevere in 1924, 1925. She was designed by Ford and Payne, a relatively unknown couple of naval architects, because Robert N. Bevere was the first the Commodore at the time of the Cruising Club of America, and he knew what he wanted in the way of a new boat. So he produced the guidelines for the architects, and they put on paper what he wanted. It was essentially his design, but professionally designed. And he wanted to win. He had won the 1924 Bermuda Race, and he wanted to win the 1926 Bermuda Race, the next one, and that's what Dragoon was built for. She was built by MB and Sons in Canada, Hawkesbury. They built big fishing schooners, that type of thing, but they had never really built a sizable yacht until this one. But he was able to get the Canadians to build this boat at a price that he could never find here in this country. So he did finish first in the 1926 Bermuda Race, but he did not win. He kept the boat for about 10 years. She was big, she was heavy. He eventually decided he'd sell her and build a new boat, and he sold her to come out here to the West Coast. Stanley Barrows, who was one of the original members of this club, bought her in I think about 1945, just after the war was over. Barrows got on her, sailed her out here through the canal, brought her up here, and he had her for 10 or 12 years. The yeah. That one. Oh, and this one. I'm sure that most of you, anyway, remember when we had the earthquake and the middle fell out of the Golden Gate Bridge. Well, yeah, there it is. Yeah, that was a terrible happenstance, you know. But here is, this must be about 1936 or 7, making her way from her moorings in Sausalito over here for the evening start of the Santa Cruz race.
Explain to your worldwide audience that that was a joke.
Oh, I'm getting there. Oh, yes. For all you concerned people, the bridge did not fall apart. I mean, it did not. The fact of the matter is they were getting very close to finishing it. But one of the intriguing things about her is in the America Cup efforts in the early 1930s, they developed these quadrilateral jibs. And here she is coming across the bay with the quad on. They were judged illegal. There was a time when the North American Yacht Racing just said, quads are too expensive, too difficult, no more quadrilateral jibs. But if you had one, you could use it. Well, he had 2 of them. And you get an idea what they look like here. She sold to Henry B. Grandin Sr., and many of us knew Henry B. Grandin Jr. right here in this room. Henry B. Grandin Sr. was at one time the Commodore of the Newport Harbor Yacht Club, and she was, Dragoon was his flagship. And he took her to Honolulu in 49 and again in 51, and she was always active, and he sold her, and she had several owners. And what happens when these bigger, older boats have several owners? For the most part, they deteriorate. And she was Canadian-owned, but never up in British Columbia. And she was on her way to the canal straight from Victoria, and down off Baja she burned, and that was the end of the Great Dragoon. Here she's sailing with Idalia, a 75-foot schooner. Idalia belonged to a very colorful member of this club. His name was Parker, and he was known as Painless Parker. And Dr. Parker was the first of the advertising dentists, the first of the dentists on Market Street that had a street-level office and a isinglass, you know, a frozen glass type thing that said, gas given, or no appointment necessary. And he had like 30 of these dental offices open up and down the Pacific coast, usually always near a port, near somewhere where there were seamen, where there were fellas getting on and off ships. And in San Pedro, in L.A., here, Oakland, Alameda, you would find Dr. Parker. But Dr. Parker didn't spend much time as a tooth plumber. He called himself, I'm not a dentist, I'm a tooth plumber. Well, he didn't fit too well with the rest of the dentists in the world. They didn't think too much of Dr. Parker, but he did illustrate that times were changing and he could, I guess, make a lot of money and afford a big yacht. So, all during the Depression, these two boats stayed in commission and raced among themselves, and they sort of kept yachting going at the time when during the Depression. The Depression was very, very hard on the yachting world. And then the Shawnee came along. Mark Fontana, one of the real spark plug of the founding of the St. Francis Yacht Club, in 1925 acquired the Shawnee to take it in the first Tahiti race. From here, the race started right out the other side of where there was no bridge then, 3,000 miles to Tahiti. And Fontana took Shawnee down there. That Idalia boat went also. There were only 4 boats that raced to Tahiti. And I think they finished third of the 4 boats. But when she got home here, he really put her into mothballs all during the Depression. And, where are you? Yeah. And here she's sailing now the first day, the first boat sailing after the end of the war in 1945, in August of 45. And Scotty Fraser got her out, and I knew about this because my father was aboard. And you look at this beautiful big yacht, and she was. It was a fine, fine boat with these old sails. But the definition of the old sails was that these sails had made it down to Tahiti and gotten back again. He had beautiful sails for her, but rarely used them. And it was a production it was a tremendous production to change mainsails or what have you. But you wouldn't use your good sails unless there was some reason to. Because those sails were built by Ratsey and Lapthorne back in New York at City Island. And if you tore up one of those sails, you got to package it up, send it back to New York, Railway Express, something like that. They'd patch it up or make a new one, send it back out to you. So you were very careful about what you did with your good sails, which led people to think, well, boat doesn't have decent sails. Well, it did have. And like so many, you had to take care of them, and he did. The Shawnee went down to Southern California and became a big part of the Newport Harbor Yacht Club. And a few years ago, a big effort was made to restore her. And the owner got about halfway through the project and decided he could never finish it, and he didn't have the deep pockets to be able to finish it. And she languished, and eventually she went into receivership of some sort and was cut up. And the people that bought her cut her up to get her lead, to get the keel off her. But lo and behold, when they got her and got what was left of her, they found she had an iron keel. That was a beauty. And DORADE, the 53-foot DORADE, where you go, DORADE? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is DORADE sailing the first day in 1935 in San Francisco. And Rod Stephens, who had a great deal to do with her success in the came out from New York. Jim Flood, I remember Jim Flood had bought the boat, delivered the boat to Myron Spalding to get it ready for the 1936 Honolulu Race. And you see the building in the background and the building of the Mile Rock light. And there's just not enough to say about DORADE, and I'm going to move on with that. But here she is, sliding past Diamond Head in the 1936 race, and she was the first boat to finish. And yeah, yeah. And well, yeah. Where'd you go? Never mind. There you go. Yeah, yeah. Is there a way to just stop it from automatically changing so I can change it? Yeah. No. 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 There. Anyway, here is Jimmy, Commodore Jimmy, I just saw here last night, and Matt Brooks, who owns DORADE today. And that's called the Bermuda Trophy, the Yachtsman of the Year trophy here with me. And it was, it's right out here somewhere. I was hoping that Matthew, I think, is with the boat in Rhode Island right now. He's getting her ready for the Bermuda Race this summer. And I always like to include Rod and Olin Stephens. These two guys probably did more for the architectural part of big-time yachting in this country, if not the world, than anybody else that I know of. The reason I put this one in here is because I was invited to do this slideshow in its entirety at the 75th anniversary of the founding of Sparkman and Stephens at the Mystic Museum about 10 or 12 years ago. And this picture was given to me at the time by Olin Stephens. No. So much for DORADE. Namsang, how are we doing time-wise, Ron? We all right? Yeah. I think that means hurry up. Yeah. Namsang was designed and built by Graves in Marblehead, Massachusetts in 1924. And oh, come on. I can't get what I'm... Oh. Yeah.
That's the next slide, so that's what you're on right now.
Yeah. Okay, but that's not... Yeah. Not more. Yeah.
Let's go back.
Yeah.
Backwards that way.
Yeah. Way too complicated. Yeah. No, I want to go back further than... Yeah. Okay, one more. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, no, that's just fine. So Namsang was bought by Oscar Johnson. And Oscar Johnson was one of the founding members of this club. He bought her in 1931 or so, found her in Massachusetts and brought her out here. You can see that that's a 1934 design, actually, maybe a little before that. Graves had built some very fine boats over the years. But Oscar Johnson, again, was smitten with this idea. He wanted to win the Honolulu race, not finish first, but he wanted to win. And he had an idea that he could do it with Namsang. So she arrived here. Yeah, and okay, well, here she arrives. You can see a little difference. First of all, she's blue, not black, but the bowsprit has disappeared. The boat has been modernized quite a little bit for the Honolulu race, including he went with a very, very low rating. This spinnaker is a one-sided spinnaker. You can see the pole is on the starboard side of the boat. The spinnaker sheet is still on the starboard side of the boat. Parachute spinnakers, as they were known of in that day and age, went around the headstay. But at any rate, he proceeded to go to Honolulu with her. Well, even before that, another pretty interesting thing, she laid right out here in front. Oscar Johnson owned Shipstead and Johnson's, the Ice Follies. And every day the sun was out around here, during the season when she was laying out here in our docks, every afternoon these little ladies who were ice skating ladies would be out sunning themselves out there. So Johnny Manarangas and I, we spent a lot of time looking at the little ladies, and at 4 in the afternoon they had to be gone. 4 in the afternoon they had to be back at Winterland out on Post Street for costumes and, you know, getting ready for the performance. So the ladies of the Ice Follies were a big part of the St. Francis Yacht Club there for a while. And she kicked around in Southern California for some years. And here she'd had another change. You can see she has some Dacron sails, but still carrying a cotton mizzen. And she was raced very well in Southern California. She was on her way up here for the first big boat series, and they lost the propeller out of her and went into Morro Bay, and they never got here. But in 1961, the catch rig was gone. She was now a big sloop, and they had borrowed this rather poor-looking jib just for the start of the Honolulu race. And this picture was taken at the start of the 61 Honolulu race. But here, this 1924 design boat won the 1961 Honolulu race. It was amazing. Wait a minute, where'd the Ice Follies get into this operation? But she did win on corrected time and came back to Southern California. And like so many, and I've mentioned already, fell into a period of disrepair. And one given day, I'd say it's about 12 years ago, here came Namsang, sailed in under the bridge, came around here, tied up, wanted to know, how do you find customs and how do you find immigration? And she had a couple of big dogs walking around on deck. She had a couple of bicycles lashed into the lifelines. She had a bottom looked like it'd been growing in dirt for years, probably was. This was pretty sick. And with all due respect to visiting yachtsmen, we weren't jumping up and down about having her out here in front of the yacht club. But with some discussions, this guy took off. He wanted to go to this island of ours. And somebody told him that all he's got to do is go up the Sacramento River and he'll find that island. He did that. In the process, what he wanted to do was get to fresh water because he had been told that all this growth on the bottom would just drop off if he got away from salt. Well, he never found out because he hit the I Street Bridge in Sacramento. The top of the mast hit the bridge. It drove the heel of the mast right through the step and through the bottom of the boat, and she sunk in 35 feet of water in the Sacramento River, right in downtown Sacramento.
Got a glorious death.
Yeah, and he said something intelligent like, "Whoa, what do you know about that?" He had no insurance. He had no way to do anything with it. The good old Army engineers, they came and took a look and said, well, we don't want to have anything to do with it. And would said to them, hey, you guys are supposed to take care of the waterways and what have you. Get it out of here. Oh, no, we're not going to go anywhere near it. To this day, it's laying on the bottom of the Sacramento River, whatever must be left of it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and then I'll. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, enough of Nam's. I was just ashamed to see what happened. Never saw the guy again. He went ashore. He got off the boat. A couple of days later, he just disappeared. He walked away. And what kind of people he had on board, what happened to the two German shepherds and the bicycles, God only knows. But so Santana, we know a lot about in this club. Santana was owned by the Eden brothers for 25 years or so. And she was built in 1935 for...
You can't touch that button. This thing advances it too. Just use these buttons.
Oh.
Don't touch those, because that's what advances it.
Oh, we can't. Now you tell me. What do you mean I can't touch it?
Can't touch it. Just touch that one little button over there.
Mhm. Yep.
Ronnie, now back us up a notch or so.
Huh? Yep.
Santana, there we are.
All right.
There we go.
Well,
Just don't touch the track counter.
this is Santana as a schooner coming out of New London, Connecticut, where the Bermuda Race started in 1938. And Stewart, from Southern California, sent Santana back around to the Eastern Seaboard for the Bermuda Race. He was the president of the Union Oil Company. He owned the Union Oil Company. And he just said to old Cap Steen, they operated a half a dozen tankers. And a fellow by the name of Steen was the flagship captain in El Segundo. And he said, Cap Steen, I want Santana in Bayonne, New Jersey by such and such a day. And Cap Steen says, boss, we don't go through the Panama Canal. Our ships don't go back east. He says, I know that, but I want my yacht in Bayonne, New Jersey. Cap Steen says, you want it there, boss? We'll get it there. And he did. Imagine the stockholders today if the boss decided to ship his yacht across the world. So he did, and he won in the Bermuda Race and did reasonably well. Now she had to come home. So he got to feeling some pressures, I suppose. So they sailed her to Panama, and this time Cap Steen had a tanker waiting in Panama to pick her up, put her on the well deck, and bring her back to Southern California. And again, Bill Stewart did what Bill Stewart wanted to do. So she, again, had several owners in Southern California and fell into the hands of one Humphrey Bogart some few years ago now. And Bogart was an enthusiast. He was a pretty good boat sailor. He really was. But he was an enthusiast. He just loved it. He just, any time he could be on Santana, he'd be on Santana. And his wife said on more than one occasion in print that she hated that damn boat. she said, every time Friday, he'd be off to Catalina and he'd be gone to Sunday. I'm sitting at home. And she said, I wouldn't go. I didn't even like to go out on the boat for a day's sail. Oh, this was really good stuff, you know. But Bogart decided that he would use his yacht. So this is a kind of a world-famous picture of Humphrey Bogart coming up the companionway. Up on the left is what's left of the word Santana, the name of the schooner. He had a production company that made most of the movies, successful movies he was in. The name of the production company was Santana. And so on the rear end of the small boat, you see Bogart with Santana. Well, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I could go on for another, the Volante, just as Ron mentioned, she was built here in 1936 in Sausalito for Commodore Charles A. Langlis of this club. A very nice 43-foot sloop, and she's still around. I see her once in a while. And what I kind of like about this, they're finishing the 1937 Honolulu Race. And if you look at the hills in the background, those hills are full of houses or buildings or something over there. What the hell is over there? Well, in 1937, there was nothing over there except a lot of cows walking around in grazing land. So things have changed quite a little bit. And Ron, you're getting awful nervous, but that's all right.
We can do a Q&A and we can do more slides.
Yeah, okay.
Follow-up show.
All right, I'm finished. Gatana was designed and built for Dick Danforth. Danforth anchors. He developed the Danforth anchor right here in the Berkeley mudflats in the 1920s and 30s, and he developed the Danforth anchor not for use on ships, certainly not for use on yachts, but Douglas paid him, and so did Boeing, to design an anchor for float planes, for seaplanes. You've got a 4-engine great big flying boat flying back and forth all over the world. Every once in a while, they better be able to anchor. And they didn't want to carry some great big anchor and a lot of chain and what have you. So Dick Danforth developed a light, very, as far as he was concerned, proper anchor for these big float planes. And then the float plane era kind of dried up. So he got himself into just pretty soon in World War II, he was building anchors that weighed tons. And but he had this Gatana. If you look at her, you see she looks like a bird boat. He owned bird boat number 1, which was stolen and sunk by the guys who stole her. He always liked the bird boat, so he went to John Alden, who had designed the bird boats, and he said, I want a 40-foot bird boat. So John Alden designed this raised deck hull that looks just like a big bird boat. Today, the Danforth Company moved to Massachusetts. Today, in front of the Corinthian Yacht Club in Marblehead on an anchor, if we were there, I saw it about 2 years ago. There's Gatana sitting there. It looked just fine. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, enough's enough. Thank you for having me. We're going to have a question and answer type thing, and we'll see what we can do with that. Thank you very much. Good stuff, huh?
Watch your foot, Archie. Watch your foot. Step up. Watch your foot. Watch your foot. Right. Here, come closer. There you go. Beautiful, RC. Okay. We're visiting today at the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon with R.C. Keefe, Staff Commodore 1975, member since 1950, and the St. Francis Yacht Club historian and curator. So it's great, R.C., to listen to these stories about these incredible giant yachts, beauties over the years. Let me ask you, What, in your opinion, of all the yachts that you have seen at San Francisco Bay, literally, which one, if you had to only pick one, which seemed the most magnificent to you in San Francisco Bay? Just pick one.
Yeah, I would have to say Verona. Verona was, if anybody really believes it's Verona, then you might believe it's Bolero, because the two of them are almost sister ships. But Verona had some class, some majesty to her. You ladies would like this. She was a marvelous big racing machine, but she was a fantastically good cruising boat. And we often wondered, in all the years, we had her for 16 years. One of the things that always mystified me about her cruising capacities was that, one, she had no hot water, she had no pressure system, she had no shower, she had no refrigeration, she had only a 6-volt electrical system to start the engine with, and we went cruising everywhere. I mean, you want to take a shower? Just go overboard, dive overboard, and get wet and get some saltwater soap. But when Bolero came out 11 years later, oh, guess what? Bolero had a hot water tank, but she had a pressure system. She didn't have just pumps in the two heads. She was a major improvement. But forgetting that, Verona, anything you ask Verona to do, she really was just a marvelous machine.
So now I'm going to keep asking RC questions, and if you have a question, raise your hand, and Charlie will bring a mic to you. And Julia, we have a question online. Yes, from
Lourdes Livingston.
Lourdes Livingston. Yes, has a question, and it is?
Why did Invader have black sails?
Why did Invader have black sails, dark sails? Okay, RC.
I don't have a clue why she didn't have. Are you saying flax or black?
She didn't have black. They were dark. I think they were just old. But you tell me.
No. Well, she. Speaking about sails, when you've got a 130-foot gaff rig schooner here, and you're going to take it in a yacht race, it's never been in a yacht race anywhere. What are you going to do for sails? She was then like 10 or 15 years old, probably with the sails that she was built with. Well, one of the things he had to absorb in the cost was building sails for her. And he did. He built a mainsail, a foresail, a staysail, and a jib. And she had one big overlapping jib. But she had no spinnakers, she had no racing sails as we knew them. She was currently very much at the risk of the elements. If there was a lot of wind on the course, on the 2,200-mile course out there in the Pacific, she didn't need a lot of light weather sails. But if it was light, then but even with light sails, she would probably not have broken the record.
Gordon, question.
Hi, Bob. Whatever happened to Santana?
Santana? Santana is on her way to Europe right now, on the deck of a freighter. She was purchased a couple of years ago and taken to New England Boat Works in Newport, Rhode Island, and has been completely rebuilt. And she was in pretty good shape when she got there. But again, her owner is very intrigued with the idea of having Humphrey Bogart's schooner over there mixing with the Italians and the French. So it was a shame that Matt Brooks was hoping that they would keep her here for the Bermuda Race this coming summer, and there would be both Santana and DORADE, the two older boats, in the same race. But there is a woman who owns her, and I can't pull out her name. Wendy Schmidt, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, she has some Google money in her, and she has an idea. She's an enthusiast, and she knows something about it. She also has a big swan, a very, very nice big swan, and a very nice big powerboat. So Gordon, I can tell you what little I do know about it. Santana's in very good hands so far as somebody looking after her.
So RC, the question is going to be greatest yacht racer in the deceased in St. Francis Yacht Club's history. I sailed with Spalding and Blackcollar, but I heard when I was a kid about Artie Russo all the time. You were here way earlier. Was Artie Russo as amazing? And who was if you had to pick a deceased racer from our yacht club, who's the greatest one you think?
Well, Russo, like so many, he was a very, very fine sailor. He was a member of the Corinthian Yacht Club before there was ever a St. Francis, and even for several years after there was a St. Francis. Most of the good sailor type guys, if you will, came out of the Corinthian Yacht Club. And Russo had been a Commodore of the Corinthian Yacht Club. That's where the boats were. That's where the interest was.
Ace.
And he built the Lady Gay, a very good R boat, and then figured out he could figure out a way to go a little faster, so he built the Ace. But he caused other guys. Charlie Langlis then built an R boat. He was very big in the R class, but he also had the Katanga. The Katanga was a 90-foot power boat, and he owned the Exuberance. The Exuberance was like the Yankees. She was almost a sister ship of the Yankees. She was a 53-foot gaff rig sloop. And Russo he owned the Russo Construction Company, which after the fire and the earthquake built building after building in downtown San Francisco. He became a very, very wealthy man. However, in 1936 and 1935, he had to sell all the boats. The Depression had caught up with him. And by the time the war came along, he was totally out of yachting, and he died during World War II here. But he was known as the Old Fox. And the Old Fox was he understood the currents and the wind pattern type situations on San Francisco Bay better than probably most anybody else.
Early sailmakers. When I was a kid, Larson and Sutter was hot, but what were the early sailmakers here in the Bay? And how far back can you go?
There were no sailmakers. In the days of commercial sail activity, and there still was to some degree in the 1930s, they were making tarpons, they were making big drops, cloths, and by the way, they'd make you some sails. But they had there were no local sailmakers of merit really in individual areas, whether it was Seattle or it was here or in Los Angeles. Back east, mainly Ratsey and Lapthorpe at City Island, but 2 or 3 other sailmakers were really sailmakers. And the first one on the West Coast was Kenny Watts with Watts Sails in Torrance, California. And Bill Stewart, Sr., when he built Santana, he had to have sails for her. So he bought sails had sails built at Ratsey and Lapthorne. But he knew this Kenny Watts, and he liked Watts, and he had Watts make a suit of sails. And then he had something to compare with, and the Watts sails were very good. And that put Kenny Watts and the Watts Sailmaking Company for the next 20 or 25 years in business.
Question, yes, Lenny.
Well, I don't know. I just never thought of. I arranged for Chris Kaplan to buy Santana from Ted Eden, and they didn't use her a whole lot, I suppose.
The question was, did they do great restoration?
Yeah, and I wouldn't speak to that too much. I think that's true. But most of what they did was everything that had to be done. They didn't really rebuild the boat. but they put the boat into first-class condition, varnish, paint. They did and Paul did build a lot of sails for her. She hadn't had sails in 10 or 12 years, so he did a very good job there. But again, in a given period of time, one day they had done enough and passed her along into other hands. There's something I'd like to tell you about, too, current events. We have seen over the years a number of yachts built in Scandinavia. And one of them is this model right behind Ron. This is the Corsair. And the Corsair was built for the King of Spain, or rather the King of Sweden. And she was purchased when the king died. Our member, Al Weil was one of the original members of the St. Francis Yacht Club. He owned the White House, for those of you that remember the old days of the Emporium in the city of Paris, the big department stores in San Francisco. The Weil family owned it really was the biggest of the department stores. And in traveling, when he was in Europe and in Stockholm, he went to the local yacht club, whatever, and was introduced around and about, and met a man who turned out to be a yacht broker, and suggested to him if he was interested, or they got into a discussion about this some way or another, that the king had died, and the heirs, the estate, wanted the yacht to go away. The king had made known that when he died, he wanted the yacht to leave. And his son, who was the crown prince and was coming along, the crown prince wanted the yacht away, to go away. She was 60 feet long, and the crown prince had already ordered a boat that was more like 80 feet long. So one way or another, Al Weil bought the Corsair in Stockholm, and the Norwegian or the Swedish, I can't remember the name of this shipping line that called into San Francisco, agreed to send her, to ship her to San Francisco. She arrived here in 1931, 1932. Beautiful yacht. And Al Weil owned her all during World War II, raced her here, and upon his death in, I think, 1948 or 49, she sold into Southern California. Now, the reason that this model, incidentally, the model, when the yacht arrived here, shipboard, the model was packaged up and inside the ship. Al Weil didn't even know the model exists until the ship got here. So this was maybe the first of the big models, or the nice models, that this yacht actually owned. And he didn't commission the model. The model came with the yacht. I put it up here because it's been circulated all over the building over the years, because it's the closest connection that I can make our new Commodore, who obviously is Swedish, and the name of her boat is Swedish, and she is Swedish, and she likes being Swedish. So I thought, okay, we'll get a Swedish yacht and put it up on the mantelpiece, as long as she doesn't have a model of a current yacht. The day that Teresa arrives here with a nice new model, whatever it may be, we'll put that on the mantelpiece. But in the meantime, walloping, I didn't put walloping Swede across the side of her. I thought that maybe that was a little much. Now,
That is the name of our Commodore's yacht.
She doesn't know that I did this, even, see? And I wouldn't like any of you to tell her. Oh, no. I figure this is the best way to get the message out to her. Oh, Teresa, guess what? Guess what he said? But anyway, it is kind of fun. Things like that intrigue me, and I really have no idea why.
So, RC, in 70 years of sailing on San Francisco Bay, I want you to pick one, the most memorable time sailing on the bay. What, if you had to find one, the most memorable time? Tell us about that. What would it be?
It would be defying death. As long as you, I would have liked to have had a couple of years to think about that, but
What comes to mind? Which one?
the Farallone race always started right here between the two buoys in front of these windows, and it always started at midnight on a Friday night. The Farallone race would start right here, out to the Farallones, 30 miles, around the Farallones. Didn't make any difference whether you rounded from north to south or south to west. Anyway, I was on Orient. Tim Mosley owned Orient, the 63-foot cutter Orient.
Beautiful boat.
And Orient was as fine a yacht as we ever had here, so to speak. But anyway, there was a lot of wind. We got up to the bridge like at 1 o'clock in the morning, and there was not much wind in the bay. And as we headed towards Mile Rock, the wind started to build. And by the time we got in the ship channel, we were headed on the port deck into the south, and it was blowing 25. It was black. It was cold. We had a lot of water coming aboard. It was just yacht racing, and it's, why do we do this, you know? And it's 2 o'clock in the morning. We got out 11 miles, and we couldn't see the lightship, but we could hear it. We could hear the horn on the lightship. And not let alone could we not hear that. She was rising and falling in the waves, and her anchor chain was scraping in the hawse hole, and we could hear this terrible screech. Oh, God. It was just yachting in the finest. So we continued on up into the north, and about dawn, we were in pretty close to the islands, and we knew that Bermuda had gone into the south to make a rounding from the south to the north, and obviously we were committed to make a rounding from the south to from the north to the south. Well, anyway, at dawn, things looked a little brighter. It was still blowing. It was still cold. We were in a big seaway, and we came around the islands and started down. Now we were no longer on the wind. We had been hard on the wind the whole time. Paid off, and we're reaching a little bit, and we're coming south, and here comes Bermuda on the way north. So we went by Bermuda, just outboard of her. We're probably in this rolling seaway, probably 20 or 30 yards to weather of her, and we were probably 50 or 60 yards off the rock pile. If we had dropped the rig out of the boat, we were all dead. We would have gone up. These waves were coming from Japan. They were coming from the Aleutians. And in one particular, she rose just, it was like being in an elevator. Orient's going up, and going up so that your body is almost getting pushed down on the whatever you were sitting there hanging on to. And then we fell off that wave and down into the trough. And in an instant, I'm sure I and everybody else, the 11 or 12 aboard, thought the same thing. When we get down to that trough, if there isn't water under the keel, if we hit the bottom, fall and hit the bottom, we are dead. And we fell, And Gary Mull described it. He said it was like being in an elevator in a big building when the elevator drops out faster than you do. And down we went. She hit, but not the bottom. She hit water, and through water all the way up to the first steps, the first set of spreaders. And we looked at each other. Why the jib didn't blow out, I have no idea. But we got free around the back end of the island, and Bermuda had seen this. They had seen this happen from Bermuda. And later that morning, got Spinnaker up and we're headed in. And we heard on the radio a call from Bermuda to Orient, but we couldn't respond. And then we heard Lester Stone, who was on Bermuda, calling his yard and saying, they may have a trouble on Orient. Will you get the car overboard? As soon as Orient finishes, they may want to go straight to the yard and holler and find out, what's going on with the bottom. He was just guessing. And on the way in, Mosley said to Mull, what do you think? We had some water in the boat, not much, but some water. And Mull said, yeah, if he's got the car ready to go, we ought to sail right by the yacht club, up the estuary, and holler immediately. And that's exactly what we did. And as it turned out, she had a couple of little bit of sprung fittings in the mast step, but that was all. But a lot of guys went to church that next Monday morning. A lot of guys, and I was one of them, and said, thank you. Because we could have been, have been gone, and we would have been, the 11 of us on board would have been gone too. And so out of that, what we learned? We learned that the race instructions should dictate that the roundings be made from south to north and give up this either side. Because the north side of her, with those waves coming from where they were coming from, and the wind element also, created situations like that. And it had been that way for 10,000 years, I suppose. But other than that, I have often thought, when I see the Farallone race starting and some of these people in these little boats going out there, you can get dead out there. And there's a lot of guys that go out there that don't belong. They shouldn't be out there. But the rules tend to not speak to seamanship or whatever to say alive. But why we don't lose many more boats than we have lost in the Farallone Islands is a good thing. But they continue to go, and there are a lot of them that go, as I say, should never have gone.
We've been visiting today and reminiscing with Staff Commodore, Curator, and Historian of the St. Francis Yacht Club, R.C. Keefe. Thank you for attending the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. The luncheon is adjourned.